Releasing Trauma is sponsored by the Global Association for Trauma Recovery. The Global Association for Trauma Recovery is a social impact organization serving as a resource for survivors and their families, dedicated to facilitating change by spreading trauma-related awareness and thus creating a more trauma-informed world. Learn more at gaftr.org. Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or a survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. With me today is Kellan Fluckiger, and we are going to be talking about the different phases of depression. So Kellan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, thank you. And the first thing I want to do is acknowledge your work. It's so important, at least I believe it is, for us to choose to add good to the world. I mean, we all add carbon dioxide by breathing, but you're choosing to take effort and energy to add good to the world. And I really appreciate and acknowledge you for doing that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, I always like to start out with having our guests tell us a little bit about their backstory. So, tell us a little bit about you as I trip over my tongue.
I would be happy to. I'll be 66 in 15 minutes, not really, in about a week, 2 weeks, the 10th of December, which is 3 weeks hence. So that's, I've had lots of years, lots of decades. I started out as a youngster in a two-parent home, raised with what would have been today felony child abuse in the name of religion, obedience, and being a good boy, Johnny, that sort of thing. And what it left me with, and when I say that felony child abuse, it really would be. Would have been removed from the home, and so would my sister have been. But anyway, the way it left me was feeling like I wasn't good enough, and never would be. And so starting at a young age, like 13 or stuff, I started experimenting with drugs as sort of an escape from reality. And it left me with this two things. The first thing was a conviction, an absolute rock, soul, bottom conviction that I wasn't good enough and never would be. And the second one was an insane desire to prove that I was okay to my mom, who was the principal administrator of the discipline. And so I spent all of my adult life, 40 years, from 13 to 53, roughly, 52, I guess, trying to prove that, trying to get that stamp of approval. I never talked to anyone about the struggles that I was feeling, and the depression that I struggled with led me through multiple relationship failures. I was married and divorced 3 times, in and out of rehab centers, different addictions, and so forth. And the real issue was not any particular addiction, but it was an addiction to self-loathing, because I truly believed, number one, I wasn't good enough, couldn't have anything. And when I created success, which I did, I was blessed with some decent brains. And so I had a really high-powered career, big success, made a lot of money, big positions. And so on the outside, it would look kind of like you see in a movie, right? On the outside, it's like, oh, wow. And on behind the scenes, it's like, holy cow, that kind of thing. And the battlefield behind me was messy for 40 years. And I struggled through that and never spoke with a soul or talked to anyone, and lived my life really not feeling anything. I remember regularly saying, I don't know what it feels like to feel anything. I was a great method actor. I could be whoever I needed to be at a very high level, convincing, powerful, in any situation. But when the lights went out and I was alone, I didn't know who I was and I didn't feel anything. So that went on for 40 years and multiple relationships and a whole messy, very messy life in that context. So that's the background up to about 2007.
Wow. So, one of the things you said was being addicted to self-loathing. And I know I personally can relate to that. I have a lifetime of self-loathing behind me. And I think a lot of our listeners probably can relate to that as well. And it stems from our abuse when we start out, especially as kids, and those who are supposed to love us the most, constantly put us down, berate us, tell us we're no good. They wish we were never born, all of that fun stuff. No wonder you hate yourself as you grow up and you go through life.
Well, all of that is true. It was a lot of emotional shouting and yelling and swearing and all that sort of thing, but it was reinforced with, the sticks and the spoons the physical beating. I remember even in high school. So it wasn't just when I was a little kid. In high school, I remember hiding in the locker room, getting dressed last because I didn't want anyone to see that I was black and blue because I was ashamed.
Wow. No kids should have to go through that. They really shouldn't. So you didn't tell anybody. You spent a lifetime in silence or solitude, basically, in your own mind.
Well, I believe that it was my fault. I believe that every problem that I had, I ended up attracting, the women I were married to were, most of them were broken. And one was raised by an alcoholic stepdad and one's mom committed suicide when she was 12. But I had no clue what any of that sort of thing did to anyone. I was also completely broken and I didn't know how to offer any kind of support. So I clumsily stumbled through relationships doing the one thing I knew how to do, which was make money. So I made a lot of money and figured that would be okay and solve everything. And it didn't. And then when I got a lot of success, then I thought, well, I don't deserve this. So then I would sabotage it and destroy the career and destroy the opportunity. And then I have to go start over again, which I was quite good at doing. But it happened over and over and over again.
Right. It became a pattern, a cycle. So how did you, what was the catalyst? What finally turned the tables for you and made you realize, this has got to stop?
Well, it wasn't anything I did. It was a divine intervention. And these invitations come to us in different ways. Sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's an event, sometimes it's hitting rock bottom, losing everything. I never lost everything. I didn't do that. But in August of 2007, I was at the height of my career. I was making just a lot of money. And I was also a $3,000 a week cocaine addict. And I was making so much money that $3,000 a week didn't matter. I was single again for the third time. I had 4 teenagers living with me who were 4 of my 10 children. And I came home on a Friday night in August of 2007, getting ready to go party for the weekend, and had this strange urge to turn on the television. Now, that doesn't sound like anything, except I never watched TV. And I had the biggest, coolest stuff you could buy because, that's what you have when you make all that kind of money. You hire somebody and they can put all that crap in. But I didn't know how to turn it on. So I had to ask one of my kids how to turn the TV on because I actually didn't know how. So one of my daughters, who was 16 at the time, she turned it on for me and then threw the remote at me and stomped out of the room like a teenager might do. But anyway, it landed on a television program that I'd never heard of, but it was called Intervention, which is a reality TV show about people who stage interventions for loved ones who are in trouble. And I'd never heard of it. And I watched for 10 minutes, and the protagonist on the show was a high-ranking executive with a cocaine problem. And so I watched about 10 minutes of it, and I said, I'm not watching this crap. So I turned it off and walked around the house for about a half an hour and still hadn't gone out yet. And I was just getting ready to go out, and I would have been gone for the weekend. Kids were teenagers and took care of themselves poorly or well or whatever. I didn't know. And so I had to turn the TV back on. Now, this time I knew how to turn it on. So I turned it on, and that program started over in the middle of the hour at the beginning, and no, I don't have a DVR, and no, it wasn't on the schedule, and no, it can't do that. And so it did, and it scared the crap out of me. So I thought, I should watch this. So I watched it. It went really poorly. The guy refused all help, stomped out of the room, berated his family members and everything else. And so it went really poorly, but it scared me bad enough that I went to bed instead of going out. When I went to bed, I went to hell. I went somewhere. I don't know what happened, but while I was asleep, ostensibly, the parade of all of the things of my life went before my eyes, and I saw and re-experienced all of the failings and the sadness, and not in an accusatory negative way, but I felt more painful sadness and remorse than I have language to express. It was terrifying and terrible for an undetermined period of time. And after a period of time, there was a voice that said, "It is enough." And it wasn't an angry voice. It was just, "It is enough." I woke up, and it was 5:00 Saturday afternoon. So some 18 hours I'd been somewhere. And I got up and realized that I'd been issued an invitation to change my life. I wasn't sure what to do, but I knew for sure the drugs had to stop, and I had to leave the career I had to do something completely different. So I threw away $1,000 worth of stuff, and I went cold turkey, $3,000 a week to zero in one day. That got me sober. The other half of the divine intervention was 2 weeks later. Because of the positions I held, if you think of a CEO who gets free stuff, people give them free tickets and free goodies and all kinds of cool stuff. Well, I used to get all that stuff. And so 2 of the tickets I got were some backstage passes to a concert by a fellow named Yo-Yo Ma. Now, if you know classical music, you know who that is. And if you don't, you don't, and it's okay. But he's electrifying and cool, and they were coveted tickets. So I got some tickets to that, and I was single again for the 3rd time. I didn't want to waste the other tickets. So I came to the groups that I managed, and I said, "Who likes classical music?" And some lady in one of the groups said, "I do." And I looked at her and I said, "Have I ever given you anything before?" "No." "Okay, here, we'll see you there." So we met at the venue, and halfway through the concert, now this is 2 weeks after this other event. So I'm stone cold sober 2 weeks. Halfway through the concert, I had this incredible feeling come over me that I recognized from 2 weeks before. And a voice said to me, "You need to marry this woman." And I said, "You must have your wires crossed. This is insane. I've screwed that up so many times. We don't want to talk about that." Backstage later, because they were backstage passes, later that night, the feeling came back and said, "And you need to tell her tonight." And so I argued like crazy because, she worked for me. I mean, I could have been accused of harassment and all kinds of stuff. So, and I didn't really know her very well either. But anyway, you don't win those arguments. So I did, and she didn't call the cops or, sue me. She thought I was crazy. I mean, it went about like you would have expected.
Sure.
But 2 weeks later, she had her own set of experiences, and she resigned her positions, and I quit. And we took off on a new adventure together, and that was 14 years ago.
Wow.
So that was the second half. And the first thing got me sober. And the second thing was this angel that was sent in the form of this woman who had the courage to help me start to talk to someone and get some help so that I could get past this thing that had plagued me for 40 years. And she was unflagging in work and support to get that done. So that's what changed the game.
So, after you started talking to somebody, and, everything kind of started coming to the surface, what did that look like, or what did that feel like as far as finally letting it out?
Well, to start with, I lied my face off. I believed that it was still my fault and I had to be in charge. So I'm talking to a shrink and I'm telling him things that went on. And I'm also telling him all the stuff that I learned and that I know now. And I'm self-analyzing and self-doing everything because after all, it's all my fault and I'm supposed to know this. So it took me 2 years of talking to somebody before I actually even told the truth and had the ability to just talk and shut up and listen and be vulnerable and just have a conversation that was not something I was trying to control. So it went lousy at first and then better and better. It took probably 3 or 4 years of this 14 to get going in a good direction and sort of to just make friends with the truth and be open enough to not hide.
Yeah. I'm surprised the therapist didn't call you out on your BS. Some of them are really good about that. But so, what are some of the things that you've learned, since you've been sober, since you've, met your wife and been in therapy and all of that? What are some of the things that you've learned about life and, mental illness or depression and whatever you want to call it?
Well, the therapists, I saw several over time, like they all were universal in both diagnosis. Some called it bipolar, some called it MDD, whatever. But the things that I've learned is one, it's not my fault. And number two, it's okay. You can't do anything until you figure out where you're at, what you want to do next. So I've learned to tell the truth. I've learned to be honest and to just talk about what's going on instead of pretending that I've already got it handled, which I didn't, but I didn't want to do that. I've learned that whatever my mom was thinking, it doesn't really matter. I don't hold any negative emotion there or anything anymore. And what I know for sure is each person is on a journey through this life, and they are where they are, and nobody needs my judgment. Everybody could use my kindness. So part of my rule, both in my coaching practice that I have and as a way that I live my life, is the judgment is at 0% and kindness is at 100%. And the best that I can do as a person is to make choices like you're making by doing this podcast, to do things that add good to the world and allow people to explore their journey instead of feel bad about it and have all the barriers that prevent us from moving forward.
I like that, the judgment at 0%, the kindness at 100%. I think we all should live like that. Can you imagine what the world would be like if everybody lived like that philosophy?
Well, it would be wonderful. And it would also be full of people making progress.
Yeah.
And people choosing to do good things. And it would be full of a lot more growth and a lot more opportunity and a lot less vindictive sort of retribution. One of the things I started writing books too after that, and I've written 15 and I have 8 more underway. And one that I just finished the first draft of about 3 weeks ago is a book about forgiveness. And the title is Forgiveness, A Journey of Courage to a Place of Freedom and Power. And what sparked that was the realization that I don't have enough information, number one. And number two, it's not my calling to extract some warped version of justice on anyone. We have, legal systems, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're fair and sometimes they're not. But if I live in a place of either continuing anger because somebody hurt me or continuing guilt because I hurt someone else, which, I did plenty of that in my brokenness, all that does is it prevents me from doing good. And so why would I choose that path instead of just allowing whatever systems there are to work and ultimately trusting the divine that there will be a structure and a system that will allow for truth and good things to happen.
So you've been able to learn to forgive yourself.
That was the hardest thing. I believed with all my heart that, I mean, I even attempted suicide a couple of times. When you get to the place where you look in the mirror and you say, they, the great they, they're right. I'm the root of all evil. There's no good that I'm doing. There's a feeling of hopelessness and despair that is so profound that we don't have language for it. And I gave it a name. I called that feeling the name of the black, because I couldn't find any other words. And when you get there, your only answer is to eliminate yourself. And so you believe that. And forgiving yourself, one of the things I think people confuse a lot is forgiveness with excusing something or justifying something. It's got nothing to do with that. If someone did something, there may be consequences. Example I use is my dog. I got a dog 10, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, and he was just a puppy. Got him in November, and then New Year's Eve, a couple months later, we were, being a bit rambunctious, and he bumped into a speaker stand. The speaker fell off and landed on his foot and broke all the metatarsals in his paw. And he was howling, and so we took him to the veterinarian in the middle of the night on New Year's Eve, and they did surgery and did what they could and everything, but they told us that even though they'd done everything they could, he might have a limp later in life. And so he did. He developed a limp that happened when he either ran a lot or got cold or whatever. And so the point about that is animals, dogs particularly, they don't hold any grudges. They forgive, and they do that, and they just participate. But he was permanently afflicted with this thing. And so people don't often understand the difference between the shaping that took place in someone's life because of certain actions and forgiveness, which is choosing to hold emotional negativity. Like the dog limped. And so I might be permanently or for a long time shaped by abuse or scarring that happened to me. I can forgive a person, hold no animosity toward them, allow them to be on their own path, and still have a lot of work to do to deal with the limp that I still have.
Gotcha. Wow. Well, Kellan, thank you so much for coming on. This has been really amazing to talk with you and, hear a little bit about your story and just know that, even 40, 50 years later, you can still heal and you can still go on to live an amazing life.
Well, it's never too late. One of the things people often ask, if you could tell people one thing, here's the one thing I would leave with your listeners, and that is, I don't care where you've been. I don't care where you are now, and I don't care what's happened to you. It is never too late to matter and to have a big impact as you live into your own divine purpose. I mean, that is a choice you can make, and no one can prevent you from making that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you again for coming on. How can our listeners find you?
One of the fun things about having a name like Kellan Fluckiger is that I'm extraordinarily easy to find.
I bet.
There are 2 Kellan Fluckigers in 8 billion people. The other one is my son. I'm a lot older than he is, so I'm easy to find. All the books that I've written are on Amazon. You can Google my name. There's thousands of hits because of my executive career. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, Facebook, podcasts. I have one too. And also, and so my name on any of the platforms, all you have to do is spell it right. It is a little difficult name, but if you spell it right, I'm really easy to find.
Awesome. Awesome. And listeners, you know that I will have all of Kellan's information down in the show notes. If you're listening from one of our partner stations, just head over to releasingtraumapodcast.com and pull up Kellan's show. I'll have all his links to his books and all of that good stuff there. So Kellan, again, I thank you for coming on the show. And listeners, as always, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you in the next show.